get started. This is the Technology and Product Safety Perspectives webinar. Hello everyone, I'm Dennis Blasius and I'll be facilitating the presentation today. Thank you for attending. As of now, we're approaching 150 attendees, so many of you are here and I know you're anxious to get started. A couple of housekeeping notes. Due to the large number of attendees, we'll not be able to take verbal questions. You are welcome to use the chat feature to text, and if we have time, I'll try and address your questions with the panel. Please be sure to remain muted during the presentation. I've done that for you, but in case you're able to unmute, please refrain from doing so. This webinar is being sponsored by ADK Information Services. Along with St. Louis University, ADK has been offering product safety management certificate programs and other types of learning opportunities for over a decade. Among these is our certificate in product safety management, which begins on April 15th. Today's topic, technology and product safety, is one of those hot button issues that every consumer product organization must contend with. The fact that you are here suggests that you are looking to increase your level of understanding regarding how emergency technology may have safety implications. You'll hear from 3 authorities in their respective fields discuss that role, the role that technology plays. Our first speaker, in fact, is Jacqueline Campbell. She's with the Consumer Product Safety Commission. She's been at CPSC for over 10 years, working on consumer product safety issues related to textile flammability, organohalogen flame retardants in electronics and emergency technologies, as well as agency testing and certification for regulated products. These regulated products include efforts to minimize testing burdens. Jacqueline will discuss merging established and new technologies, such as the combination of textiles and electronics in wearables, and the potential risks and hazards that are different from those found individually in many other technologies. Jacqueline received a BS and MS in textile science from the University of Georgia. She's well versed in anything textiles, but certainly becoming a specialist in this area as well. Jacqueline, I'll start the slideshow and turn it over to you.
Thanks, Dennis. Again, this is Jacqueline Campbell, and I'm a member of technical staff at the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission. And in that role, I'm a staff member who works on characterizing and identifying hazards, as well as hopefully finding ways to mitigate them. So if you go to my first slide, Dennis. So just before we get started, a quick disclaimer that this is a staff-generated presentation and it has not been reviewed or approved by the Commission. So I'm sure that many of you are familiar with our agency, but for those of you who are not, we are an independent federal regulatory agency. We have just over 500 staff, about 520, I think. And we are overseen by a 5-member commission that are all political appointees and Senate confirmed. We have over 15,000 products in our jurisdiction with a mission statement that revolves around protecting consumers from unreasonable risks of injury or death from consumer products. And I'm sure you can see from that graphic there, with a societal cost of over $1 trillion annually, we definitely have our work cut out for us. So today I'm going to just speak a moment about an emerging technology, wearables. These products are worn on or in the body, and they connect typically to remote devices. So I'm sure many of you are wearing some of the, maybe the wristbands that track your exercise or simple health metrics like your heart rate. But there are many more examples of these types of devices, and in many cases, there are a lot that are being integrated into textiles. So this is just an example of one of these technologies where you have maybe 2 different areas that are coming together, and you have to be careful when you're implementing these new products. Are there new hazards that are potential from integrating these technologies together? So due to consumer interest, because these are some pretty cool things that manufacturers have been coming out with, this area has been growing in recent years. And there have been some big numbers that were bandied around at the beginning of the development of these types of products. But while it hasn't maybe reached the initial growth expected, the products are forecast to still have over $150 billion in sales by 2027. We have a little visual metaphor here. With all this cool new technology and consumer products, the question is, how are regulatory entities responding? So we have the rabbit and the tortoise to describe the pace of innovation, which tends to be very fast, versus the pace of regulation, which is necessarily much more slow. Because regulation occurs within an established legal framework and technology growth is based on innovation and research, new products definitely test these established frameworks. So there can be a lot of uncertainty for folks trying to bring new technologies safely to market. So this is, you don't have to read all of this, but this is just kind of a visual representation of one example that's a difference between a medical device, which is regulated by the FDA, versus this consumer product, which is regulated by us at the CPSC. The FDA has totally different requirements than we do, typically requiring pre-market approval, especially if it's a medical device, while the CPSC does not. However, the CPSC requires certification for products under its jurisdiction that are subject to a regulation. And if it's a children's product, that certification would need to be based on laboratory results from a CPSC accepted third-party laboratory. In some cases, and this is the part that's really a challenge for a lot of people, you can use the same technology and perhaps even the exact same product that could be potentially in either jurisdiction, just depending on how it's marketed, the specific design features, or any claims that are made about the product. Now, I do want to point out that the CPSC does not always rely on regulations. And as I mentioned earlier, with a jurisdiction of 15,000 products, there's no way that we at a staff level would be able to manage that. In many cases, we actually defer to consensus standards or voluntary standards unless the commission finds that the standards are inadequate to address safety or that the regulated community is just not complying with it. So before we move to a regulation, we always, unless there are very extenuating circumstances, we look at voluntary standards to help provide safety in these consumer products. Okay, so just because there's not a regulation for a product or a specific hazard, that the agency cannot or does not take any action. So as reality is actually the opposite. There are very few recalls that are affecting regulated products. The majority of the actions we take are on defects or products that don't have regulations in place. So I think that that's something that you really need to think about when you have products that are out there in the marketplace, especially if they're new and they aren't subject to regulation. So here we have a summary of some of the CPSC activity for new products and emerging hazards. And that's not just with wearables, but since the 2014 recall of a fitness tracker that had to do with skin sensitivity issues, CPSC staff have been monitoring emerging technologies such as wearables that we've talked about today, 3D printing, and the use of artificial intelligence in consumer products. In 2017, the staff published a white paper, and you can find that on our website, that laid out the emerging products and how the agency should be approaching them. And then we followed that up with a public forum where we were interested in gathering feedback and ideas from stakeholders that occurred in 2018. Since that time, staff has been working towards, because I mean, these products are out there, we need to have some plan to be able to evaluate them for safety and to look at them if they've been involved in any kind of incidents. We've been looking at creating a framework that we can use within our agency for how to approach these technologies. So we've been working with partners such as NIST to implement a kind of an overarching framework that has to do with connected products. as well as with ASTM to develop a standard guide for manufacturers and designers who are implementing action in products. So we additionally are to help set up some of our laboratory to be able to evaluate these products, which is very exciting. Next, to wrap things up, because these are new products and there's a lot that's dependent upon how the product is designed, really it's best practices that you have to kind of stick with in order to bring these products safely to market. So first, we suggest that you establish a formal design review team whenever you're designing a product or you're bringing a new product to market. Be sure that when you're doing this, that you create a team that has the right knowledge and that it's balanced. So be sure that you have representation from your technical group, definitely, but also maybe your legal group. And in some cases, you may want to bring in outside experts, for example, human factors experts, to look at maybe how consumers are going to interact with the product. Also be sure and identify where critical checks should be conducted, and then make sure that there's a protocol in place where they're actually going to happen. And the review should be robust and across the life cycle of the product. Next, definitely we are big proponents of designing safety into the product. It should be a design consideration from the outset, and this should be communicated as a commitment consistently from throughout your supply chain. So maybe not just in your company, but also to your suppliers. I think it also doesn't hurt to highlight this commitment to your consumers, because I think most consumers do see safety as a value-added feature. Next, you should definitely plan for intended and foreseeable use. And foreseeable use also includes unforeseeable use, as much as you can plan for it. So believe me, we see a lot of products and we're often very surprised at how consumers can come up with ways to use products. But be sure and perform due diligence when you're evaluating your products, and don't just rely on marketing and labeling to define your product's usage. If something goes wrong, it's not always a compelling argument for us if you say that it was labeled to not be used a certain way. You know, and as I mentioned earlier, it's a good idea to have experts evaluate your products with all usage in mind. And if you have concerns, definitely spend time exploring ways to warn or protect against, or obviously our preferred way, eliminate any of the hazards that are found in evaluating the product. You should also maintain quality standards throughout the product life cycle. I think we've all learned over time to be cautious about golden sample test results. So be sure that when you're sampling, it's for quality checks throughout the production timeline. I mean, it's in your best interest to find any issues early on in the production cycle, so it can have a big impact on quality assurance without substantially impacting your costs. Next, there's a test program. It's important to remember that many other are definitely consensus standards and mandatory standards need to be part of your test program, but also look for other testing that's going to give you assurance of product safety. That might be designing an ongoing sampling plan, testing extra samples, or maybe even requiring more stringent test limits than those that are defined by the standards. So, as is the case for many of these emerging tech products, because they're brand new, there may not be a straightforward existing test program. So definitely do your due diligence to work with knowledgeable experts to design one if you have to. Finally, institute a proactive compliance program. I mean, I'm sure if you're here watching this, you definitely have interest in this, so I'm probably preaching to the choir. But if you have a product, especially in our jurisdiction, definitely report it, even when you're not sure. And keep up with any changes and communicate requirements. So those are some best practices that we would suggest that you always implement in establishing a safety culture within your company for consumer products. And with that, I think I'm ready to hand it over to the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Our next speaker is Don Mays. Don is the Chief Safety and Quality Officer for the Samsung Electronics America. As a former Senior Director of Product Safety and Technical Policy for Consumer Reports, Don has worked to advance product safety, product performance testing, laboratory management, consumer advocacy, and public education throughout his career. He has testified on product safety issues before Congress, before presidential committees, and government agencies. His background includes consulting work for Deloitte and Touche, where he guided the firm's product safety and quality assurance advisory services. Don's going to share information about data analytics as a potential technology resource in risk identification and assessment. And there you go.
There we go. Well, thank you, Dennis, and welcome everybody. Just to talk about big data analytics, I'm sure you've probably heard this term, big data analytics. It also can be called predictive analytics or advanced analytics. There's all sorts of names that have been given to the sort of the ability to manage big data. I'd like to tell you about some of the different tools that are available to companies out there to help them identify risks. Here's the challenge. If you're a product safety professional, how do you get better insight into emerging safety issues? And how do you detect escalating trends that can put your company and consumers at risk? So here's my challenge, and it's probably yours too, is we just get way too much information. We get inundated with information. And the fact is that if you don't really understand what's in that information, you could be putting not only your company, but also consumers at risk. And you have to realize that if you are a product safety professional, or you're in a position similar to mine, you've got responsibility for reporting those safety risks to government agencies. This is what Jacqueline was talking about, reporting those kind of issues to the CPSC, or if you're marketing the same products in Canada, to Health Canada. Again, being able to sort out all of the safety issues among all of the massive data that you're getting is really quite a challenge for any company. Right? So I'll tell you about the challenges that we have here at Samsung. If you look at the information that comes into us internally, we get a lot of calls into our call centers. We've got several call centers throughout the world, actually, the process calls from consumers that range from anything about asking questions about how to work a product to perhaps a complaint about a product. We get emails, we get letters, just like any company. We get notifications from our retailers, who are our direct customers, about any kind of issues that they may be having. Our service network and the service network providers, which is expansive, will also provide some feedback about our product, and then sometimes there might be safety concerns. We also monitor our warranty claims, and we monitor our parts replenishment data. So information that would indicate that you're going through a lot of parts around in your part department, maybe an indication that you've got a deficient part that could be subjecting consumers to a potential safety issue. And then, of course, we have a legal department, and the legal department processes any claims. Could be a claim for anything from property damage to an injury associated with the product. And then we also have product forums. So Samsung.com, for example, where we also sell products to a certain extent, we also collect information from our consumers that buy those products that might be complaining about let's say, the performance or potentially the safety of a product. All of this internal data is what we call structured data. Why is it structured? Well, they all reside within a designed database. Actually, in our case, there are several different databases, which I think is probably true for most companies. Having relational databases is an aspirational thing, but I think that most companies find that they've got several different databases. They don't necessarily communicate with one another. And that becomes a real challenge to try to manage and understand all of that data that's even in your own internal databases. But let's look at external sources. On the right side of your screen, you'll see what we call unstructured data. And this is information that's coming into your company from public relations media inquiries, for example, or mass media reports. You might be getting information from enthusiast blogs. Like, for example, because we're an electronics company, we get information coming in from, let's say, CNET that might be talking about our product. We also rigorously follow social media. So there's social media is generally the first channel of information in which you might learn about a potential safety issue. We also get information from our retail customer reviews, stuff published on e-commerce websites, for example. And then, of course, we get information from the government, like CPSC Section 6 reports, and even those that are published on saferproducts.gov, which is CPSC's publicly accessible database for people to file actually complaints about the safety of products. We monitor those very, very closely. And then we also monitor one of my old employers, Consumer Reports, and what they're actually saying about the safety or the quality of our products. So all of this now resides in this unstructured format, and it's really hard to sort of pull that together with your structured data and try to make sense of it. What big data or advanced analytics does is takes that information and puts it into a central data repository. And through various tools and what we call an analytics engine, you can try to make sense of all this information. The best way to do that is actually through a visualization type display that can help you understand that data very easily. So here is one of the ways of which data can be visualized. And this is, you've probably seen this kind of thing before. It's called a word cloud. And the way that this works is that the most prevalent issues have got larger font. And you can color code this so that the issues that you might want to be paying attention to as a product safety professional, such as, let's say, injury data, can be color coded in red. So in this case, we see burn, safety, bleeding, those words, if they're coming out in a word cloud, it can help you focus on those particular issues. And what word clouds also allow you to do is you can click on the word burn and it will show you any kind of incident or information behind that issue that you can try to understand as to what the cause of the burn was. Here's another way of looking at your data. These are tree maps, and it works pretty much the same way as word clouds. Essentially, the larger the box, the more prevalent the issue. And again, you can color code these so that red might be the ones that are the highest risk to your company or consumers, the ones that you really want to focus on. And then the smaller box, if it's color coded, let's say green, in this example, it might be something that you don't necessarily need to pay attention to. Again, you're not going to be able to handle all of the data that's probably coming into your company, but these kind of tools allow you to focus on things that are probably going to be the most important, highest risk to your company. So here's something else that we use here. It's called speech-to-text technology. You get calls coming into a call center. You generally have a call center agent who's vigorously trying to type the notes as people are talking and complaining about their product or asking questions about their product. They don't always capture all of that information accurately. And they generally can't keep up with the rate of speech of the caller. So in addition to essentially recording this information by typing the information as the caller describes the problem, what we have is a technology called speech-to-text, in which it takes essentially the voice and turns it into a text-based system so that in the future, if anybody wants to research this, you can pick out certain keywords or concept pairs that you want to focus on. So if in fact somebody's complaining about, let's say, a burn injury, well, you could go in and search for any speech-to-text output that shows the word burn, and then you can drill down on that to try to see exactly what the issue was, and try to map it to any kind of product or type of. So it's a very handy tool. It takes a lot of work out of managing call center data. I will say that the technology is not 100%. You'll see maybe 80 to 90% accuracy. One of the challenges is if people talk too fast, which I sometimes do, or if in fact people have heavy accents, it might not be capturing all of the information accurately. But at least it's a starting place and a way to take some work out of it. If you always can go back, if you have a system like we do, you can always go back and actually listen to what the person is saying. But the keyword search that you get out of the text is a handy way of sort of short-circuiting all the labor involved. So Here's another one. We have a picture of Dennis on the right-hand side when the technology doesn't work. We don't mind. This is sentiment analysis. This actually captures from the text of somebody speaking. It can capture essentially the emotions of consumers. Somebody's particularly mad about something, upset about something. It allows you to focus on that. And it essentially analyzes groups of words so you can try to get a sense for the emotion of the consumer as they're reporting it to you. Again, it's another tool that we use to help us sort of direct our efforts in the right direction. And my last slide is about another technology which is relatively new that a lot of companies aren't quite using yet, but it's emerging. And this is called robotic process automation, or RPA automates routine data analysis tasks. So, for example, if you're a retailer and you're getting many different test reports in the course of the day, and you're trying to go through that, it becomes very difficult for you to sort of manage all of those reports, looking for any kind of anomalies, let's say, in the data, any problems with, let's say, failing test results. What RPA does is it reads that information automatically. It's sort of data. It does a sort of a word search and puts the information into a database, and very well-designed database that can categorize information. It automatically enters that data for you, and then you can set up a decision tree as to whether issues need to be escalated or not. So as a product safety professional, you may decide that anything that cites injury or serious property damage or potential injury, it is going to be directed toward your office. But if it's something that perhaps does not present any risk to your company, then it gets sidelined. Again, it's a way of handling essentially paper documents on a mass scale so that you can take labor out of that process. So that's a couple of ideas that I wanted to share with you about new technologies for handling data and how that data can be directed towards managing risk for your company. Thank you. Next speaker.
Thanks, Dan. And our next speaker is George Strom. George is from Intertek and is Intertek's Director of Business Development in the Internet of Things. He is a 25-year veteran of Intertek, now focusing on the interconnected networking of everyday objects and devices, enabling them to communicate with each other by sending, receiving, and storing data. Risks arise when products and software are untested, resulting in issues with interoperability, stability, compatibility, and data security.
So thank you, everybody, for your time today. Certainly, it's a changing world, as Jacqueline and Don indicated, and the need for data is driving a lot of the activity in the Internet of Things market. Just a brief television commercial on Intertek. We've grown from a company 25 years ago. I was employee about 7,000. Today, we have about 43,000 employees globally. And that's largely changed due to customer demand of additional services and like customers using us for getting their products to market. So it's a very interesting time in Intertek now with the Internet of Things and the growth of connected devices throughout all of our lives, even as consumers or and manufacturers. When we talk about IoT security, I think that there's a misconception in the marketplace that number one, it couldn't happen to me. I think we've all been compromised or had a credit card compromised as a consumer. And obviously you work with your provider and they take care of you if there truly is a breach. But we have to look at all our devices in our house as potential springboards that could impact all of us. And one of the critical areas that impacts all of us is the vulnerabilities that are in our software. And all software has vulnerabilities. And we have to look at the software as an entry point. And if you look at just the NIST database, in the first half of 2019, there were over 11,000 vulnerabilities that percolated to a threat level. And the threat level of vulnerabilities are typically rated yellow, orange, and red. And red is when something happens where there needs to be a patch downloaded or something has to be done to protect the device. And sometimes you need that vulnerability to actually have the functionality of a product, but in how a manufacturer or the software developer goes about looking at the vulnerability and protecting the device is very critical. So ironically, I find this to be probably the most interesting slide from a regulation perspective, is that over 22 states introduced 52 bills in 2019, and that California led the way with their first law that was became effective January 1 of this year. So the California IoT law addresses what's considered reasonable security. This is outside the scope of, say, the privacy issues that are out there, say, for the European Union or for the New York Shield law that occur that protect all of us as consumers. But now they're asking for device manufacturers who have wearables that are connected or, say, a smart toy. What can you do from a reasonable security perspective? And manufacturers largely, I think the interaction I've had, they felt it wasn't their responsibility. Where does the liability, reside? And the liability really starts with the end manufacturer as they design the product and how it's going to communicate. And I think that's one thing that's a bit different when you start looking at the building blocks of your products from a software perspective. Historically, the industry that I've been involved in has looked at safety issues as your risk of shock, your risk of fire, and your risk of critical hazards, pinch hazards. And that's now evolved into the threat level is now what vectors could your device be attacked? And I think that is a different conversation that we're having with manufacturers because largely it hasn't been on their radar. And as one manufacturer told me, George, I'll just be the ostrich and stick my head in the sand. While that's a strategy, it's probably not the best strategy to have. And I think every manufacturer is a different journey. And cybersecurity isn't just we're going to do X and we should be secure. Every day, manufacturers have to decide, what do I have to do to stop the criminal before they impact myself and my data? And even the retailers are now saying, if I have a device on my shelf, is that Bluetooth secure so it won't potentially attack my network, download my client credit cards? And as consumers of retailers, we have to ask ourselves, what is considered reasonably secure? And that's the language they use. But that reasonable security comes with a lot of questions that manufacturers just aren't ready for. And the three real kind of areas that we talk about risk, and my life is all about talking about risk, which in essence is really kind of boring if you hang out with me because all I talk about is risk. It's not as fun as talking, some other things, but conceptually it's not every presentation, very rarely people smile when you talk about cybersecurity. But number one is really, access to personal information. I think that resonates with everybody. How are you going to protect my information? And that's something we all deal with every day. The second thing, and this really where it dovetails into the IoT device, is that unauthorized access. The IoT device is now basically an extension of your network. And if that device, whatever the consumer product may be, if that's in your home, could someone get onto the network, gain access to your personal information, and take away your credit card information? Or we've all seen the videos of the doorbell that's been hacked or the security camera hacked where they're actually talking to people in their homes. That's very damning to someone's brand awareness, saying that they're secure. And the third really is attack from another IoT device. Could you leverage another IoT device to get into another IoT device, to get into your credit card information? And yes, people are that clever. We've actually have examples that we've worked with manufacturers where we were able to, in our laboratory, conduct an ethical hacking or penetration testing to actually understand how to control their entire install base by getting to the kernel of the software. Now, if you go back 5 years ago, and 10 years ago, or 15 years ago, these were not conversations we had with manufacturers. We were worried about how safe is your product? Will it start a fire in a home? Now we're worried about protecting the infrastructure of the home or the store or wherever it may be, or even if it's wearing you have a wearable, there's personal data that you're transmitting to your Apple Watch, or not to say Apple's bad, but any type of personal data. You have to protect that personal data or your own data. So really, those are the three vectors you have to look at from a threat landscape. So when you think about the building blocks from an operating system, it really starts with the manufacturer's operating system. And then they start sourcing, say, the device drivers, and that is layered on top of the operating system. Then they're going to an open source library, and then they may have some proprietary vendor code. All these are elements of your software. And as you develop your software, you have to be worried about what's on the open source library, what's on the device driver, and what's on the operating system. It's not just saying my vendor code, the proprietary nature of my software is protected. All those other building blocks are part of your product when it goes to the marketplace. And one of the biggest challenge manufacturers have is, number one, legacy systems. What do I do if I haven't taken my measures on my legacy systems? Number two, what if I have acquired somebody, what's on their systems? And the third one that really is critical is how you update your software. That software lifecycle management is a really critical element to a manufacturer's enterprise security, let alone their product design controls they have over a product. So that once they have these controls and they start to have implementing measures, then they start looking at end of life of software. And you have to understand as a consumer, end of life software means, is my data scrubbed from the software or the device I've been using in my home or on my personal, carried with me, would be a mobile, tablet or a smartphone. So that's really where that software lifecycle management is now a very critical element to IoT devices. So probably the easiest visual I try to, when I explain what I do for manufacturers, if you look at a very simple product, in the bottom left-hand corner of the triangle, you would see, say, a smart enabled device, and on the right triangle, you see the actual product or the IoT, the thing, if you would. Well, the thing is communicating data in some way, shape, or form to the handset. And on the handset, you have a mobile application. And on that mobile application, it's then backed up to the cloud. And the cloud is as nebulous as it sounds. There are multiple cloud providers, and not all have the same security. So a manufacturer could start developing their software, developing their mobile application, and say, we're going to back this to the cloud. Even choosing the right cloud provider and who has the right security measures, that's a critical component. There's multiple cloud providers. Some have excellent security, some have marginal security. So how you vet that out as a manufacturer is really unto yourself, but you have to look at what can I do if I'm developing a product to make sure that I have security from the cloud back down to the mobile application. Is that tested, that mobile application, from a security perspective, all the way to the device? Because that is where the threat level, those are the vectors, if you would, they could potentially attack. So a lot to chew on in 10 or 15 minutes, but it certainly is something we have to think about as we're developing our products and as we coach our end clients at Intertek. Not designing for cybersecurity typically will drive your costs up. If you get caught with a hack or a threat, or you get called out and bad PR, to redesign your software is about 4x the cost, the original design. So certainly it's a changing world that we're all living in, and it's something that we're here to assist manufacturers in getting their products to market. So thank you, Dennis.
So thank you, each of you. We've got three different perspectives of how technology, emerging technology, can cause us to re-examine some of the beliefs, the approaches we take when it comes to product safety. We do have time for a couple of questions, and they've been coming in to me. Jacqueline, here's a question for you, if you can unmute.
I'm here.
If there's no regulation or voluntary standard for my product, how do I don't want to say protect myself from the CPSC, but how do I assure myself that I'm going to be in step with CPSC if something should go wrong?
That's a great question. I know that I've had many people ask me, if there's no specific requirement, even if it's and there's no specific consensus standard, what am I supposed to do? Well, to that I would say, you're introducing a product. You are responsible for that product. But I think that there are a lot of ways that you actually can do things. They're just maybe not immediately apparent. One is to look for internal resources at your company or maybe a company that you partner with. There may be people who have worked with similar products or have had to institute a process for a new product. I think that you can get a lot of lessons learned from those internal resources. Along those lines, look for analogous products. I think that in many cases, there are products that are very similar, either in design or maybe you've already done some early hazard assessments, like maybe they have similar hazards. And there are potentially consensus standards that may already exist for some of those products. But at the very least, you could see what process was taken in terms of bringing those products to market and ensuring safety. A really good partner for people to reach out to are the testing laboratories. I think that there, you're talking about people who have seen a lot of different products in a product area, and they can probably, and I believe that there are a number of services along these lines, but they can probably help you design a test plan or some means of characterization, and maybe even a little bit beyond the testing, but rather even like a larger thing like a certification program along the lines of product safety if you're unfamiliar with the testing that you might need to do for a product. You could always work with experts to set up a plan. There are a lot of consultants who are out there, maybe some on this webinar even, who've had a lot of experience with safety, product safety, and who can help you design a test program or help you get the right information that you may need in order to ensure safety. Also, and I know people are afraid to do this because they think that suddenly they're going to be on our radar, but you can always talk to us. You can reach out to entities who regulate, whether that's us at the CPSC, a state level entity, or FDA, another federal entity. And you know, we're going to try to put you in touch with the right people to get you the information that you need. I think beyond all of that, it's important for you to document your efforts, to not just have test results, but also show why tests were chosen, especially if they aren't specific to that product. But you're doing your best to try to characterize a product for safety. I think that all of those things are some best practices, but it's something that a lot of people really do struggle with. But I think you'd be amazed when you reach out to others who have had this experience that they can give you a lot of guidance in this area. Thank you.
Thanks, Jacqueline. George, maybe I'll bounce the same issue to you. So Jacqueline's talking about really at the federal level being a lack of standards. We're too early on in some of these processes. So is this something that will fall then, and Don, maybe you'd have an opinion, to testing labs, to the standards bodies to take the lead in? And
it's a combination of both the testing laboratories and the standard development organizations. And as technology advances, in many instances, there's a lag between the standard and the integration of technology. So typically what will happen is that if there is a standard that has certain elements or sections that could be borrowed or leveraged, you can create a test plan to leverage that technology into your standard until the actual, whatever the ANSI UL or ANSI CSA standard is to have that technology. So that there's certainly the ability to create a test plan based on existing technology, and it typically borrows, in my experience, it would borrow, say, from a technology, like an information communication technology standard, and leverage those elements of the communication ports for the product safety. But then on the standard development organizations, and how that works is how the debate and lobbying goes to integrate these technologies into a standard. And that goes through a voting process, and then there's an announcement, then there's a voting announcement, and it goes through an iteration. I don't know, and how long that takes is unique to each SDO, particular standard technical panel. So yes, yes, and yes.
Don, do you have an opinion?
Well, just to bridge what George was talking about, you know, I think it's important also to be involved with the standards development process if that standard is affecting your particular product. As Jacqueline mentioned, there's an ASTM standard, the 15.75, that's under development right now for the safety of connected products. I'm actually chairing that subcommittee, and we're getting close to being able to have a final document to go out for ballot. And there's probably 60 or so people that attend the subcommittee meetings. But those are people that are keenly interested in what they need to do to make sure that they're going to bring a safe, connected product to the marketplace and make sure that it's not vulnerable to unauthorized access, what George was talking about. So getting involved in the standards development process, I think, is a very strongly advised practice for companies that are entering into market where they don't have, the skills or the knowledge, the internal knowledge. You can bridge off the knowledge of other people in the community.
Great.
And Jacqueline, I just wanted to jump in and say thank you, Don, for making that call for people. Because I know that from the CPSC perspective, we're always going to get a more robust applicable standard the more people we have involved. And it's amazing how much experience people can share. And that really makes for a much better consensus standard.
I 100% agree with Jacqueline and Don's points, by the way.
Great. Well, there's simply too many questions for us to address them all, but the one that intrigues me, you've all talked about risk and how do you identify risk and identify it early and use all that data that you have already, find a way to leverage it into something that's workable and usable. Don, maybe this works for you. So there's lots of software. A lot of people are developing things in-house, trying to find ways to do this. Without revealing any Samsung proprietary secrets, is there a particular software package that you've noticed that's been effective for that sort of thing?
I get that question quite frequently. Actually, I'm pretty software agnostic. There is not any one software package that can probably do everything that a company would want to do with big data analytics. In fact, in most cases, when I was in the consulting business, I used to recommend that companies would work with service providers that can actually sort of harness or customize a advanced data analytics program, because they have to work with various types of databases, be able to pull that data in and make sense of it into some sort of a visualization dashboard. So even customization of that dashboard, I think, is very, very important. So no, there's not any one software package. It really requires a company that has sort of the skills in providing advanced data analytic services to companies to come in and set that kind of thing up for you. I worked for Deloitte in the past. Deloitte used to provide that service. Intertek provides that service. UL provides that service. Exponent provides that service. There are a lot of companies out there, and they all have somewhat different approaches, but they all have those skills of being able to customize a program for your individual need.
Excellent. Well, I think that in the interest of time, it's always better to get done a minute early than a minute late. Thank you all for attending today's program, and a special thank you to the presenters for sharing their expertise and their time. This presentation is just an example of the excellent instruction our students receive when they attend the product safety management courses at St. Louis University, the Chaffetz School of Business. The spring program, which opens April 15th, provides a certificate in product safety management. We are currently offering a $1,000 tuition discount, which is a 22% reduction from the typical registration fee, but this offer ends on January 31st. So the information is there in front of you. Write down the link, and if you're interested, you can always send in a message to info@slueducation.org. Thank you very much, all of you, for your attendance, and we'll talk again soon.